Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the spring of 2021 Cattle and Carcass Training Webinar Series. My name is Jody Pitcock, and I'm with the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service Livestock and Poultry Programs. Tonight's webinar is part of two in a three-part series hosted by AMS in partnership with USDA Cattle and Carcass Training Center at Colorado State University. The Cattle Carcass Training Centers were established by USDA under a cooperative agreement to provide educational and training opportunities to stakeholders like yourself interested in the official quality grading of feeder cattle, fed cattle, and beef carcasses in the United States. In addition to Colorado State, West Texas A&M University in Canyon, Texas, and the Meat Animal Research Center at Clay Center, Nebraska, also serve as USDA cattle and carcass training centers. This evening, we will review the USDA box beef cutout reports and the factors which influence these reports. Our presenters will explain the price differences seen for various USDA grades of wholesale beef cuts and look at specific elements of these reports that can be used to make more informative production and marketing decisions. We estimate our series will last about 1 hour, depending on how many questions we receive for the Q&A portion. This webinar is being recorded, and the recordings will be available on the USDA Cattle Carcass Training Center website within the coming weeks. You can also find recordings and materials from our fall of 2020 webinar series there now. I do want to advise the participants that you are in listen-only mode, but we will have several opportunities for questions to be answered during this evening. Please use the Q&A icon located on your Zoom toolbar to submit your questions. The purpose of this webinar series is to educate cattle industry stakeholders about what the livestock mandatory reporting, or otherwise referred to as LMR, is all about, where to find them, how to understand them, and how to use them to facilitate marketing decisions and mitigate risk. We understand there is a tremendous interest right now on how the U.S. cattle supply chain operates more broadly. But the focus of our presentation is solely on existing resources USDA manages and provides to the public. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker tonight. Mr. Chris Sommers is a seasoned USDA market reporter with the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service Livestock and Poultry Grain Market News. He's been with USDA Market News team in Des Moines, Iowa since 1996. During his long career, Chris has served as a market reporter and spent many years on the wholesale pork report and was instrumental in transitioning wholesale pork to livestock mandatory reporting. Currently, Chris serves as the market reporting supervisor, overseeing the box beef reports, boneless beef, cow and bull meat, byproducts, tallows and proteins, and the hides. Before joining Market News, Chris was a USDA meat grader in the cooler in Illinois and Iowa. Chris will expand and explain to us tonight how USDA gathers the information for these reports, these beef sales data, introduce some specific reports to you, and explain some of the trends seen through the reports over the years. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Jody, for that kind introduction. And tonight we're going to go into how quality grade impacts the value of the box beef and of cattle using the USDA LMR Box Beef Reports. AMS's role in the box beef reporting under LMR, we administer the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act. We publish 6 daily reports and 11 weekly beef reports under LMR. We have an audit branch that ensures the reports for accuracy, and we do preserve confidentiality of all transactions. Who submits to us, AMS, They're federally inspected plants that slaughter at least 125,000 head per year. If you calculate that out, that isn't very many head per day. Stop it there, Joe. Let's take a look at who has to submit beef sales to AMS under livestock mandatory reporting. Federally inspected plants which slaughter at least 125,000 head per year, that calculates out to be in about 450 head per day, in my math anyway. LMR covers about 90% of the box beef volume that is produced here in the United States. It encompasses first-time sales only, distributors, grinders, exporters, and those who do not submit or do not slaughter any cattle do not have to submit data to AMS. What beef items are submitted? Well, there's quite an array. It's all the primals, subprimals, and different cuts that are produced out of a beef carcass. Also, ground beef, trimmings, and boneless processing beef are also included. Beef offal and variety meats are not reported under LMR or mandatory price reporting. When and how do they report to us? Twice a day they send in files, one at 10 o'clock, one at 2 o'clock on a daily basis. They electronically submit them to us in a single batch file that is encrypted. Normally, the reports that you see on the web are released 1 hour after the packers submit the data. Each submitted beef sale has specific items that are covered. Destination, pretty self-explanatory, domestic, overseas, or NAFTA, USCMA. Sales type, negotiated, formula, or forward contract. Delivery periods, most of the product that you see on the daily reports, or all the product you see on the daily reports, are in that 0 to 21 day delivery window. Forward contracts are going to be your 22 to 60 and the other 2 delivery periods. Refrigeration, you've got fresh, you've got frozen, you've got aged. On the daily reports, you're seeing basically all fresh product. There is no aged product that is included on the daily reports. Also, we have to break it out by class, whether it's a cow, a bull, a steer, heifer, dairy bred, etc. Then we go to the classification, i.e. what grade is it? Prime, choice, select, ungraded, etc. Then we further break it down into whether it's branded or unbranded, whether it's upper 2/3 choice, lower 1/3 choice, select. One of the key important things that we do get is a specific item code or the packer SKU number, and we assign that to the individual IMPS items that are showing on the reports. The 2 key components, though, are the quantity sold in pounds and what the FOB plant price is. Those are the 2 things that are key in this whole scheme of things. Daily spot and negotiator reports, we have the box beef cutout that it also includes the box beef cuts, the LMXB 402 and the 403. We also have the boneless processing beef and the beef trimmings, the 400 and the 401, and also the cutter cow cutout and the cow cuts, the LMXB 405. This is an example of the afternoon box beef cutout and what's shown on the report. So first we show the cutout value. On this given day, the choice cutout was 262.77. The select was 251.30. The change from the prior day, choice was up 4.10. The select was up $1.44. The line right below that is the choice select spread. On this given day was $11.47. Simple math. Take the choice minus the select to come up with a spread. And then it shows the total load count for that day was at 124 loads. Right below that is the composite primal values. That shows you the value of that primal rib, that primal chuck, round, loin, etc., as it would be hanging on that carcass before it hits the cut floor. What is the cutout? Everybody thinks that it's a magical number. It's the estimated gross value of a beef carcass based on FOB prices paid for the individual beef items that are derived from the carcass. Again, this is an estimated gross value. The costs of fabricating the carcass into the individual items aren't deducted. The yields that we get are just a simple average that are provided by the packers that are covered under livestock mandatory reporting, i.e., it's a simple average. We're not here to show anybody's P&L. Also, it is a 2-day roll-in average. What factors affect the daily and weekly negotiated box beef cutout? Destination is domestic only. The sales type is negotiated. Have to deliver within 0 to 21 days. It's fresh product only. The class, it's coming out of native steers and heifers, and it has to be either choice or select. There's no branded items that are going into the daily cutouts or the weekly negotiated cutout. Let's have a poll question now and see just how good your knowledge is of a beef carcass. Which primal has the highest yield to the carcass and thus the most influence on the cutout calculation? I'm going to give you about 10-15 seconds here, and then we'll show you the results. And if I could have the results popped up there. Those of you that chose the chuck as the primal with the highest yield to the carcass, you are correct, 29.62%. The rib is only 11.4%. And as you can see, the rest of the percentages are here on this slide. When we look at this afternoon box beef cutout, there's another section below what we had shown before. This slide shows the current volume for the choice cuts, the select cuts, the trimmings, and the ground beef for that given day. Below that then is the individual items, individual cuts that were traded on that given day. So for example, the 109Es, the ribeye lip-on bone-in, there was 11 trades, had 16,543 pounds on this day. The price range negotiated was 1,086.55 to 1,166, and the weighted average was 1105.45. There's a trend that we've been seeing for a long time on the box beef, similar to the cattle. There's a shrinking daily spot market volume. This slide, we show what the average load count on a daily basis. 2001, we were averaging over 400 loads. 2021, so far this year, we're about 125, someplace in there. Last year, there was a little bit of an uptick, but the trend has been lower as far as the volume from year over year. Reasons for this spot sales decrease. Each packer has thousands and thousands of individual product codes. I mean, just astronomical numbers. Not all of those product specs fit into a category that we show on a report. Maybe it's a trim level, it's 3/4 inch instead of 1/8 inch. It might be that that product is a light product code or lightweight product, which we don't have a SKU for or an IMPS code for. Also, the branded programs have become more prevalent, and as those have become more prevalent, it's taken away less of the commodity product that goes into figuring out and goes on the daily reports. The branded programs go on their own separate reports. Also, as the confidence in the negotiated reports have went up from both sellers and buyers, it's increased the formula sales. People are more comfortable, they're confident that the report, that the numbers are reflective of what's been trading, and they're just comfortable. They don't want to do the daily bid and ask to procure their product. So let's go on a formula basis. And that is becoming more prevalent, as this next slide is going to show. You can see that in 2002, on a weekly basis, we were about 1,800 loads in negotiated on a weekly basis. Formula, we were at a little over 1,000. We go to 2021, and we see that the negotiated's barely just a hair below 600, and the formula's up to a little over 1,400 loads. On a weekly basis, we've produced quite a few different reports. Some are spot, some are formula, some are forward. We have one of the key ones is the LMXB 459, which is the weekly negotiated box beef cutout and cuts. The formula box beef is the LMXB 454. That's formula trades of choice and select cuts. Forward sales, same type of thing. It just is the forward sales delivering 21 days out and more. Then we have the negotiated branded box beef report. That's the LMXB 452. That's going to show the negotiated prices for upper 2/3 choice, lower 1/3 choice, and branded select. Then we have a spot market for the prime. That's the LMXB 456. We have a spot market or negotiated report for the ungraded beef. Also negotiated for boneless beef and trimmings, and formula for boneless beef and trimmings. And then we also do the negotiated weekly market cutter cow cutout and cuts. One of the key things that we also produce on Mondays, it comes out usually about 2 o'clock, is the weekly comprehensive box beef cutout, the LMXB 463. On this given slide, the comprehensive value for the week was 300.61. That's highlighted there in yellow. As you go to the right, you can see that it's broken down by grade. So prime was at 313.66. The branded was 307.90. The choice was 300.66. Select was 285.39. And ungraded product, the cutout, come to 264.75. And at the bottom of this, it shows the total loads of product that were reported for that given week, which encompasses all delivery periods, all purchase types, all destinations, 6,420. Also, we do the box beef item summary. As you can see in the yellow for 109Es, lip bone-in ribeye lip-ons. For that given week, we had 69 loads. The weighted average was 107 or 1,072.11. 89% of that volume was choice or up, or a higher grade, choice or prime. Delivery period, next to that, 22 and up. So only 4% of that 69 loads were delivering out front. Only 4% were going to export. 50% of those loads, so approximately 35 loads, were on a formula basis, and 1% of those were aged product, so that product was over 14 days old. That concludes my presentation. We'll go to the question and answer session, and feel free to ask anything that you would like. I'll try to do my best to answer your questions. Thank you for your time and participation in this webinar.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that explanation of the box beef, LMR, livestock mandatory price reporting, and everything that goes into that. We had a couple of questions. The first question that came through was, can you explain, you mentioned the term IMPS, IMPS. Can you explain what that stands for and what it means?
That stands for the Institutional Meat Purchase Specifications. It's part of the USDA. There is a separate division that writes those specifications, and there's for beef, there's for pork, there's for sausages, there's for offal products, a wide array. And if you would like any more information on that, feel free to get a hold of me and I can direct you. It's all on our website.
Okay, good deal. A couple of more questions before we move on. The second question was, does Market News audit staff? Do they audit the self-reporting values?
We do cross checks every single day to double check all the accuracy of our reports. We have set up Excel programs to double check what the computer says, or one program says. We're double checking it with another computer program. So we're making sure before any numbers go out on a report that everything's all accurate and everything's bona fide.
Okay, and then one more question, and we'll save the rest for the question and answer session at the end. Appreciate everybody that's submitting their questions. Can you explain how the formula sales are determined?
Formula sales are determined by using a pricing mechanism that uses a publicly available quote. So in other words, what I'm going to say is, I want to buy a load of meat from you next Thursday. We're going to price it off from Wednesday night's LMXB 403 for that given cut, for whatever that weighted average is. So it's not bid and ask. We're not bartering back and forth. It's going to be determined by whatever is printed on the LMXB 403 or any other publicly available report.
Okay, very good. Well, Chris, I sure appreciate your time tonight, and we'll invite you back here at the end to highlight on some more questions that we have. Without further ado, let's go ahead and move on with tonight and move over to our second speaker. If you joined us last night, you remember Dr. Stephen Koontz from his wonderful presentation that he gave last night and walked us through the livestock Poultry Market News website. Dr. Koontz is a professor in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at Colorado State University. He works in the areas of commodity marketing and risk management. Dr. Koontz's interests are in the commercial agriculture production and marketing. Dr. Koontz is going to help us navigate to key beef reports on the Market News website, talk about what the data has illustrated over the past year during the pandemic, and share some insights into how these reports may be useful for cattle operations. Please welcome Dr. Koontz.
Thanks for that introduction, Jody. This video is being recorded to offer you an educator's perspective on making use of LMR Box Beef Price Reports, and also the data that you can access, the real depth of data on what goes on in downstream beef product markets. Okay. I would say market information, it really goes without saying. Market information is important. It's absolutely essential for individuals to have good foundational information about what's going on in the marketplace that they're in. It's simply essential for making good business decisions. But there's more to it than that. The overall marketplace also requires that the folks that participate in that market really understand the supply and demand conditions. They understand the prices. They understand what's been happening and what's likely to happen next. So free market economies really require informed market participants. If they're not, then they don't tend to work as well. So again, what are the prices, and where we're headed with this is some understanding of what the market potential is. Again, I'm counting on most folks involved in this webinar maybe getting their information from some sort of data provider, and that data provider is going to understand these USDA price reports, the data sources, and you as a data user can ask them better questions if you have an understanding of the breadth of what's going on there. Further, this type of data is used very extensively by downstream traders of beef products. The retail organizations, the food service organizations that buy products, they know what they're paying. They're interested in what other folks are paying. They're interested in the price variation across cuts, those types of things. So this type of information is very much used downstream from producers and packers. And because of that, I would argue it's also very informative to upstream producers as well. This is communicating that idea of really market potential. So what I want to do is I want to take a test drive of the USDA AMS Market News website. So let's do that. Let's click on the link for that website, and it will take us right to the official site. And we'll page down a little bit, and where we're headed is livestock and meats, this particular link. So we're going to click there, and we'll move down. Your historical data, if you get into that type of stuff, is available here. And the data marked is where we get the LMR data. Okay, reports by commodities. Last time we talked through cattle. This time we're going to talk through meat. And just as a hint, this meat link is going to take you right down here on this page. Okay, so there's 5 potential links. Links 3 and 4 are going to take you to pork markets. Links 5 are going to take you to lamb, veal, and other meats. And we're interested in the top 2. We're interested in the daily beef reports and the weekly and monthly beef reports. Now, as opposed to cattle, my familiarity with the beef trade is that this is effectively a national market, and I know some folks that argue it's potentially certainly a North American market. Okay, one of the places that's worth stopping first, if you're not familiar with this, is this document that describes the overview. Let's zoom in a little bit. It tells you about the variety of reports, how things are put together. Here's the link to the data mart, and this is a 7-page document that really talks to you about beef price reporting, what goes into the understanding of cuts. So that's going to tell you about your IMPS codes, for example. If you're new to this document is certainly worth a read. So take a look at that, and let's jump back out. So what we're really interested in, if we're digging into this market, is we're going to be interested into these box beef cutout and cuts negotiated sales. We're going to have morning and afternoon sales. So the afternoon sales are really a summary of what happened all day long, and in the morning lots of meat trade goes on first thing in the morning. So we see this report comes out June 8, and it's telling me about what was happening. So that's today, and that's telling me what was happening as of 9:30 a.m. So this is really a pulse of what's happening in this market. I'm more interested in a longer term perspective. So this is yesterday's summary of what happened up through 1:30, and you have the split out of the composite cutout value for choice and select, the different primal values. Sorry about that. Let's zoom in more than a little. You've got your choice, select, spread, choice cutout value, select cutout value, the different pieces, primals associated with the cutout, some summary on the loads that are traded over the prior 5 days and the prices at which they're traded. And then as we scroll down, what we see is we're going to have information on choice cuts. We've got information on tonnage and pounds, numbers of trades, total pounds, price ranges, and then a weighted average across these specific cuts. And you can know exactly what we're talking about here based on their IMS code. So we'll roll through those majority important cuts, and then we'll move into select. And we've got the same, usually the same sets of IMS codes and depth of what's going on in that meat product market. Okay, and as we roll a little bit further, we're going to get down to where we have information on what's going on in the ground beef market as well. So choice, select, and ground beef, and that takes us to the bottom of the page. So that's what's happening with daily information. So you have a morning report and then an afternoon summary of the day, and that's the great place to start. That tells you what's going on today. And what I really like is, we'll roll down here. So if you're interested, there are much more information. If you think about beef product cuts, there's a huge amount of them out there. So there's lots of information on byproduct and trimmings, things like that. But I really like this summary report. This actually sits on my desktop, and it has some nice graphics. It works you through, hey, what's the weekly choice cutout? What are steer and heifer weights? 5 market weighted average that we talked through the last webinar, and the choice select spread tells you, I think it communicates a lot about consumer demand. And then these links over here are going to take you actually to places where you can download the data if you're so inclined. But this has that nice summary of what's going on in the valuation of the primals, and then some information on slaughter, futures prices, etc. Very nice summary of what's going on a daily basis. All right, so let's back out, and we're going to head not from the we're going to head down one link from the daily beef reports and go take a look at weekly and monthly. There's that comprehensive cutout at the top. Might want to take a look at that. But I want to dig down deeper into the negotiated beef cuts. It's coming out on a weekly basis, so this report's coming out on Friday. So let's go take a look at it. And let's zoom in a little bit. So this is your weekly summary across your primal group, some volume of trade information, and then as we dig down further, we have information on the valuation associated with your the cuts within your primals. Okay, so your subprimal cuts and their respective IMS codes. Okay, detailed information on choice cuts versus select cuts. Okay, so we can dig in any sort of detail you're interested in. I've got information on a brisket, a select brisket, and what its weighted average price is over the prior week. Roll through select cuts on into information on ground beef and the volume of trade in the different types of ground beef. Okay, so we're at the end of the document here. That's the negotiated sales weekly summary. That's one thing that I take a look at. Gives me the big picture of what's happening with the beef trade. In addition to choice and select through these negotiated sales, so let's move down one link, and what you see are, what about branded product? If we have enough information, it's a very similar looking report that's going to tell you about valuations associated with branded product. And then we move down a little further, we have some ungraded product. What's the valuations of that? And then further yet, a very similar looking report to what we just took a peek at, for prime product. Prime has become much more important with some of your discount stores offering that type of product in their grocery section. It's not just a product that's bought by food service anymore. All right, similar to cattle, there's quite a few folks that trade beef on a formula basis. So I'm not negotiating over my price. I'm just going to trade at what everybody else is trading for, some sort of formula arrangement where I might have premiums or discounts associated with some level of value added, and maybe some discounts associated with large volumes of transactions, things like that. So there's information that's reported for the week about, again, choice cuts, select cuts, and ground beef. That's a formula trade. And then finally, negotiated sales, 22 to 90 days out. So 3 weeks to 3 months out. And you know what? That sounds an awful lot like a forward trade or a forward contract market. And we take a look through here. What are they forward contracting? It looks to me like they're getting some brisket sold, maybe for some summer holiday grilling. You've got some folks that are looking to lock up some brisket and lock up some loins and some either round. Okay, so gives you some information about how we're trading things for delivery out into the future. This particular report, again, that looked pretty dull, but the reason is we're after Memorial Day, and periodically this has a lot of activity around those major summer holidays. Okay, so there's the 3 broad categories. You have your negotiated trade across the different types of products. You have formula transactions and things that look an awful lot like forward contracts. And then let's move down to comprehensive cutout, and that link is going to tell me to go click on this text file. And there we have the nice reporting of your primals, across your primals and across your quality grades. What's the valuation? How do those individual cuts get valued back up to a carcass level? What does that tell you about the value of that underlying carcass? And then you've got again, the quality breakdown, and then a cross section of how things are traded. Okay, so there's your comprehensive, and let's move all the way down. I'm looking for my favorite report. Comes out on Monday, Cattle and Beef Weekly Summary. Looks similar to, for me, it's similar to that daily report. I've got some nice graphics that communicate information pretty efficiently. Let's go take a look at beef production. Take a look at the market closures, or take a look at the packing plant closures, not market closures, excuse me. Packing plant closures last year when the pandemic kicked off, and some information again about weights, breakdowns, and then your comprehensive boxed beef valuations. Some very nice weekly summaries to dig into. And then one last final thing that's away from LMR. I get more than a few phone calls about how high potentially grass-fed beef prices are. And hey, here's your grass-fed beef price report. Comes out monthly. It's a much harder market to attempt to report in a very objective fashion, but you have some price ranges across what's being observed in this market, and then communicating what's the premium for that grass-fed product. That's enough on that. Okay, so let's move away back from the website, back to talking about what we can observe when we take a look at some of the data from that website, pull it into our packages where we can do some analysis on the data. Let's do something interesting. Let's, in particular, in this moment in time, go back and take a look at what the pandemic showed us about beef product prices. Okay, and I want to go take a look at a tenderloin. That's your IMS code of the 189A. You can find it on that list. And what you see is this is a pretty expensive product that very much goes to the restaurant trade. And when those restaurants started to close down, what we saw is this product almost half in value. So consumers don't like that sticker shock. They'll pay for it when somebody else prepares it, but they're generally not prepared to do it themselves. And then once you see the packing plants closing down and those limited supplies, this rallies back to reasonably strong price levels. But take a look, it's stronger through this spring. What that shows me is the market potential expressed by that grilling season and the strong valuations of tenderloins currently. Again, this product halved in value when we started the pandemic. So that was your tenderloin. Let's go take a look at the ribeye. Again, you can go dig into the IMS codes. This is the 109E. Your rib, again, ribeye, lip on, bone in, sharply tanks in value when the pandemic starts, a real substantial drop in price. And then when supply constraints kick in, when the packing plants have been closed for a while and that supply chain is reasonably empty of this type of product, prices elevate substantially to ration its availability. Now take a look. That's what happened when the pandemic kicked off. And you know what? We got back to eating a lot of those ribeye products for Christmas. That is what this information communicates to me. And during the spring rally, we're on the way to some pretty high prices for this particular product. All right, so that's looking at a particular IMS code product. Let's back out and let's look at the whole rib primal. What we saw with the whole rib primal was a real sharp reduction in the valuation when the pandemic kicked off, and then when the supply chain tightened up considerably and there simply wasn't much product out there, very high prices that we approached again come Christmas. That type of product is highly valued over that holiday season. And you see the market is on a pretty sharp climb here now. So that's your rib primal. Let's take a look at the chuck primal. The consumers are very comfortable purchasing chuck type products and cooking them at home, and you don't see a dip in the valuation of this when the pandemic kicks off. And in fact, folks are not going to grocery stores, or excuse me, they're not going to restaurants, they're going to grocery stores. And they cleaned out the shelves, they ran up the prices to start with, and then when the product was hard to find, some substantially higher prices. And I don't think we'll see chucks of that value. I don't know when we will see that again. That is just an astronomical chuck value because it's simply not available in that time period. Similar idea for rounds. Consumers are comfortable cooking these at home. They're not interested in buying loins and ribs, those types of things. They're interested in buying chucks and rounds. They're much more comfortable cooking those. And you see the shock from the packing plant closures. Okay, and again, this is illustrating that packing plant closures. Your steer slaughter, which is coming from a different data source, not AMS, but this is the actual plant inspection numbers. You see the sharp drop in steer slaughter when the pandemic kicked off, and we had some plant closures because of substantial labor problems and health problems with those folks. A bit of a strong recovery when the plants reopen, but not running slaughter in excess of the prior 5 years, and we see a strong slaughter through the springtime. So let's go delve a little deeper into Saturday slaughter. What you see is during the plant closures, there was a little bit of running on Saturday, but not much. A very hard Saturday shift prior to the closures, and then we've continued to run very hard through the plants that were able to ran very hard on Saturdays, and they have continued to do that into 2021. So what's up with the big dip right there? Well, that's your July 4 Saturday. Likewise, you've got some holidays in here. Okay, so let's go back to the LMR data. It's not just useful for describing the shocks to the supply chain around the pandemic. If we back up a year, let's go back and look at 2019, what we saw in that beef composite value, that box beef composite value in the fall of 29 was just a tremendous amount of optimism. Very strong beef prices with very large supplies. Likewise, a lot of that product is choice, and it was not discounted across the summer. So that communicates to me that we went through late 2019 with very strong potential consumer demand. That consumer was very interested in beef products. But it's not all pandemic or good news. Let's go back and look at 2018. And 2018 is remarkable in that it's unremarkable. There's nothing happening. There's no good news, and there's also no bad news. We have a beef price that's really tracking somewhat the prior year and the base period. And you can say something similar about the choice select spread. There's really no good news and no bad news in 2018. So that's the take-home message that I was seeing in 2018. And then if you go all the way back to 2016, you had substantially lower beef values. We had caught up with our record high prices from that 14 and 15 time period. The really tight cattle numbers were starting to recover the beef in the system, or having a larger beef slaughter and larger beef production, and not having real strong demand to pull that product through the system. And you see some of the real weakness was out in those round prices, in the end meats. This market was showing you some problems that you couldn't get very excited about what cattle prices had for potential in this environment. So some of the things that we see, some real plain vanilla comments here. Very strong and different seasonal patterns in product prices, what's on the grill versus what's not cooked on the grill. Some premiums and discounts across quality grade and yield grade that are certainly not constant. They vary with season of the year, and they vary with consumer attitude. I do think choice select spread communicates information on demand. It tells you about what that consumer is willing to pay for that modestly better quality product. For me, it's not modest, but I'm speaking from a market perspective. Some substantial differences in end meats versus middle meats, and also the ground product. And you have similar issues as to fed cattle prices, in that you have a lot of formula trading in meat products going on. That's simply the way people want to do business. And you also have a substantial bit of forward contracting certain periods of the year. And in the depth of this data, you really have some very good benchmarks about what's going on in the meat supply chain. The USDA AMS really has an established gold standard on meat price reporting. So what's next? One of the conclusions, if you do a deep dive into this data, is you'll see how varied and complicated beef product markets are. That's just a fact of the world. You have different supply chains, different demands, different opportunities, and the thinking here is market potential, market potential, market potential. And are there indicators of strong demand growth, or are there indicators of problems on the horizon? So your upstream providers need to understand downstream markets. Your cattle producers that are selling calves need to understand that potential in the downstream beef markets. And then, like the grass-fed example, do you have some new opportunities out there? Is there some information that I can gather from this website that will provide me with some new opportunities? So I've got a little cheat sheet here on my website script, and then the two reports that are certainly on my desktop that have their nice graphics, and then summaries of all that information regarding beef cuts. And let's head back to the live portion of the webinar.
Well, thank you, Dr. Koontz. I appreciate that. Appreciate you walking them through the AMS Livestock Poultry Grain Market News website. There's a lot of reports out there. I know it can get a little confusing at times. And one of the questions that come in is, can you talk about the availability of export data?
I'm sorry, Jody, product exports or getting the data and exporting it for your use?
The availability of the numbers of products exported from U.S. is what I'm assuming the question is referring to.
I'm out of my element on that one. I'd like to defer that one to Chris and his expertise in the depth of the data. I know there's a good chunk of it that's lumped together. It's not split out so you know exactly what the different prices are. One of the problems is that that may reveal an individual transaction. So.
Okay, good deal. We'll invite Chris back here in a little bit, and we'll ask that question to him, and maybe he can touch on that. Another question that come in is from your standpoint as an economist, if you were going to choose one report to follow, which report would that be, or two or three?
Yeah, I'm watching if I'm looking at a particular report, it's that XB 402 and 403. It's that negotiated trade. That's going to get you into some of the details. But if you're interested in a bigger picture, just one report, Chris showed you the cutout comprehensive that 463. That is a nice, short, sweet summary that has a little more detail in it than those two favorite reports that I showed you. I really like the daily summary publication and then the weekly summary publication, but that comprehensive cutout report actually has more information in it than the summary pieces.
Okay.
That's a hard question to answer, Jody, just because there's so much going on here. What I don't know is what you're most interested in. I've always found that individuals per se, there's a particular thing they want to follow, and you've got to dig around till you find where you think that information is, and if AMS has it, it's there. You just got to dig and find it.
Okay, very good, very good. Let's see, let's go ahead. We got a lot of questions to go through here. So Chris could go ahead and join us. We'll move on and try to go through these questions as they come in. One question, Dr. Koontz, that I would like to ask you. We hear people say box beef price or box beef value. Can you explain what the difference is?
That's a great question. And as kind of a tell, that shows me who I'm dealing with when in the end, there really isn't a box beef price. We don't trade boxed beef, the whole spectrum of products. What we do are trade those individual cuts, and what the LMR data is putting together is price data on those cuts. And then it's combined with the yield information to get a weighted average of what a carcass would be worth. So if you're a stickler for demonstrating what you're talking about, then call it a valuation or a value or a composite value, because it's a weighted average combination of the prices of those individual cuts.
Okay. This next question I'm going to direct towards Chris. Chris, you mentioned in your presentation that LMR reports is first-time sales only. Can you expand on that, please?
First-time sales, what I'm talking about there is it's going from the packer to possibly a retailer, maybe a distributor, maybe a trader, maybe an exporter. That is the only sale that we are including our reports. Sometimes those other entities, what they'll do is they'll speculate on that meat, they'll put it in storage, and they'll sell it at a later time, whether it be in a fresh state or in a frozen state. All the data that comes to us is being sold by the packers that harvest 125,000 head annually. And that product is coming to us just on that initial sale.
Okay. So with that, Chris, so since the daily cutout only includes negotiated less than 21 days, is the daily cutout really a good estimate of the actual box beef market? I think Dr. Koontz kind of maybe alluded to some of that earlier in his comment. Would one of y'all want to grab that question and expound on that a little bit?
Go ahead, Chris.
It's all in the eyes of the beholder, I guess is the best way to put it.
Is it the here all and end all? No. Is it worth watching and following? Yes.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, that comprehensive cutout that you talked about, Dr. Koontz and Chris, there's a lot of information on it as well. So there's, pick and choose what you want to use and be consistent, I think. All right, so the next one, Chris, this one's going to be directed to you. And I think we got two questions that kind of are similar. One is the availability of download reports. The other one is the availability of mass data. Chris, can you share with the audience how they could get that data and how they could get those reports, please?
We've got a couple of different ways how you could get the reports. First, we have My Market News. You can go in there and you can sign up and subscribe via email to get those reports. You can also set up an API to have, if you're a computer programmer, you can figure it out. Go in with an API, grab all the data from every report that we have. We also have Data Mart, which contains all of the LMR, livestock mandatory reporting data, going back to inception, is all publicly available, and you can go in and download it into Excel spreadsheets, CSV files, however you would like. So plenty of different ways to grab the data. If you have trouble, feel free to reach out and we'll assist you to the best of our ability.
Okay.
You know, Jody, what I do is I've gotten familiar with the reports I'm most interested in, and then I know I can find those on the Data Mart. So I have set up a system where I go back in and for example, I may need to download the last year worth of data. So I go in and do that. Actually getting a paper copy or a PDF copy day in and day out is going to fill up a disk really quick, but learning learning from the websites what the report is you're looking for, and then for sure you can find that report at Data Mart.
Good deal. Well, I know in the My Market News website, stakeholders can go to My Market News and subscribe to the reports, and then when that report is released, it will automatically be sent to their email. I use that myself. There's certain reports that I follow, and that's a real handy tool. So if I know the Market News folks know how to walk people through on how to subscribe to those reports. In fact, I think on My Market News, there's some helpful resources as well. That leads me to another question. We talked about the packer inspection data or the slaughter data. Is that available publicly? And Dr. Koontz, do you want to talk about that, please?
Yeah, that's on the that's released by FSIS, and that data are available. I've never found somebody else using USDA data that I couldn't track down the original source somewhere on the USDA site. So it's FSIS is where you want to go.
Yes, and there's also another report that's published, along with that actual slaughter. You can find that on the Market News website as well, as that's the meat production.
Yeah.
Okay. This next question it says, is there any information about the distribution of sales by firm? I know it's anonymous, but can we see anything like, i.e. percent of sales by, the top firms? Can you talk on that, Dr. Koontz?
So my understanding is that's going to be an issue with the confidentiality, and when I've looked for information on the distribution of prices, LMR data is good about providing you the price range, the highs and the lows, and the weighted average. So that's what I've made use of. And what I know is that's for a particular time period, and it's going to be everybody involved in the market at that time period, provided it could be reported because you got over the confidentiality thresholds.
Okay. This next question, Dr. Koontz, we're going to let you handle this one. This is more, alluding to back last night. We're seeing live cash prices, going down on the negotiated. We're seeing, box beef prices going up, and then, negotiated prices going down over the last 20 years. What's the cause, and is it irreversible? I guess is the question. That's how the question was stated.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions there. So let me split them out. You see more and more formula trades going on, And that formula trade and forward contracting is simply the way people prefer to trade. And you see it a lot in the beef cuts. I know there are individual businesses that are buying primarily a single or a small group of cuts, and those cuts, and also hamburger. And if you're infrequently in this market, you may be pretty gun shy about wanting to jump into that pool. And it's very common for those folks to back up and go, okay, I know what the cut is worth to me. What I want to pay is what everybody else is paying. And that's really the driver of formulas. You have the ability, an individual organization has the ability to do more with less. They're able to do business without a big staff that's buying products, and a lot of these organizations are not buying a lot of products, so they really don't have the devoted staff to do that. So that's that's the direction, and you see that in cattle, you see it in beef. They want to trade at the market, and they're thin in their organization about the ability to be able to do that. So they're relying on other people wanting to trade and using their prices. And conversely, I know folks that have stayed in the negotiated market and actually have established a little bigger presence, because if they do enough business, they feel like they understand the market better, and they're able to take advantage of more opportunities. So they're actually involved in negotiation. So I think there's really solid economic reasons why we're seeing this stuff happen.
Okay. Another question. We talk about on these reports the upstream producer prices sold to the middleman. Chris, you alluded to these prices on the box beef or packer to the retailer. How close do these upstream prices track with downstream in consumer prices? Dr. Koontz, you may be the best one you probably track that pretty close.
Well, that's the downstream information we get. We used to get some pretty good stuff on scanner data and things like that, and that's rather expensive to get anymore. So it tends to fade out. And we do have retail price series, but the retail price series are posted prices. They're not if you use your shopper card or you buy something on sale. It doesn't reflect that. So the further downstream you go, the more diluted it is. But in my experience, when looking at that information, when I had access to it, lots of times what it reflected, those price differences reflected further processing. For example, a steak cutter who's doing portion control for a restaurant, of course, they're going to have a markup on what they do, and it's largely paying for those services. So I think when you look through this system, lots of times what you see in the price differences are consumer demand. What is the consumer really like? And then you see variations in prices based on the services that the different entities offer.
Okay. So one term that we hear a lot of times, confidentiality is one term that we hear talked about. We hear market transparency, whether there's enough market transparency, et cetera. Dr. Koontz, can you allude to that, those two terms?
So market transparency, and I'm sorry, Jody, I was formulating my answer and I forgot the first part of your question.
Okay. We also hear confidentiality.
Okay, yeah.
Chris mentioned confidentiality. You mentioned it.
So, there are concerns. I hear people talk about the concerns of market transparency. And I do think, if you think about how does livestock mandatory price reporting working, in essence, the packing industry is having to provide data on what they're paying for what they're buying and what they're receiving for what they're selling. So from my perspective, that is incredibly transparent. It's almost a census. It's everything that's going on. And as Chris pointed out, these packers are not giant packers. It's almost all of them. It's a reasonably small size packer has to provide information on this. Now, so from my perspective, those prices are incredibly transparent in what's going on. And the only issue that crops up is if you're dealing with an individual business, price reporting is not designed to reveal what an individual business is doing. So the goal of the confidentiality is to aggregate across enough businesses so the information that's being provided is not revealing, but it captures what's going on in the market. So if there's anything clouding transparency, it's going to be the confidentiality requirements, and there's certainly a trade-off there. How much do we want to know versus how much do we want to reveal what individual businesses are doing? And sometimes you can reveal what a business is doing to its competitors, and that's not necessarily what we're after here. And to go on a little further, Jody, to back up some, I've had access to other data that are not LMR data that are sometimes transactions or something along those lines, much more on the cattle side than the beef side. And almost always what I've had access to has matched up very, very closely to what AMS has reported. You know, the transparency in this market is tremendous. It's only a few things that might create questions, and it's not in my mind, it's not very substantial.
Okay, well,
Hey, could I add
go
one
ahead,
thing to
Chris.
that,
Yeah.
Jody?
Yeah, cool. Chris.
Pre-LMR mandatory price reporting, the only thing that we showed on the box beef was a daily box beef report and a weekly negotiated box beef report. There were no reports for formula. There were no reports for branded cuts, ungraded, prime, etc. So we went from basically a morning report, an afternoon report on a daily basis, and one weekly report to, I think, what we got about 15.
Yeah, 6 dailies
6 and 11.
Mhm.
Yep. So
okay.
I'd like to echo that, Jody. I think LMR has just been a phenomenal improvement in the reporting of price information compared to where we've come. Just a phenomenal technological improvement. And LMR is up for reauthorization. And in my mind, it's absolutely essential.
Okay. We have a couple more questions, and this next question, you know, we hear this question or we hear this question a lot, I think, and we hear people talking about, you know, packer margins and what is a packer margin exactly is, I guess, is what the question is. So Dr. Koontz, do you want to elaborate?
Packer margin's really pretty simple. It's what they're selling, which is meat and byproduct, versus what they're buying, which is going to be cattle. And that forms the basis of that margin. In concept, it's simple, but in practice, it's very complicated because there's that huge product mix that Chris alluded to, thousands of potential SKUs, you know, lots of things going out downstream, for years and years when packers talked about value added, they were talking about doing some things with byproduct and finding the exact right market that really valued that byproduct. And that remains important, but nowadays value added is a lot more of meat focused. So you know, those two things that are going out the door create a lot of value for the packer, and then the mix of things that they're buying, what types of cattle and how they're buying them through time. The other thing that messes up your packer margin is the timing of things. You know, you can look at prices today and calculate a margin today, but the packer didn't sell all of their inventory today. They have forward sales. They have, you know, they're spreading out the buying and selling. They're timing the delivery of cattle potentially different if a plant gets backed up. So, you know, we've had a lot of questions lately about packer margins, and backing up and taking a look at from a market perspective right now. You know, we have what appears to be phenomenal beef demand. And also the other thing that's going on in this time period is we're refilling that pipeline. We're refilling that supply chain, and people are getting back out, and they're not just buying the chucks and the rounds. It's the changes in the supply chain system. But the other things that are happening is we've really got abundant cattle on feed. There's plenty of animals to be bought. You saw the numbers of the Saturday slaughter. That is a huge number through all of 2020. Those packers are running as hard as they can go. I'm pretty sure there's not a packer with a plant that can run another shift. There's not another day of the week to operate. They're operating at all the days they can. And even if they had another day, could you get the labor? So,
Right, yeah.
And then backing up further, what we don't know in that packer margin, Jody, is the cost side. As Chris mentioned, that's that value, potential value of what they're selling. But what we don't know is we're not netting any of the costs out of that side. And we don't know what the potentially slower chain speeds and the shielding and some of the labor concerns and just this red hot economy, what it's doing to that cost structure, we don't know.
Okay. Well, that kind of in a way touches the last question that I want to touch on. It's why do fed cattle and beef values not move in tandem?
Because cattle are cattle and beef is beef. If you take a real long-term perspective, go back and look over years, you'll see some very similar movements. But inside that margin dynamic is really the economic signal of, do you invest in the packing sector or do you disinvest? And this industry has had real strong economic signals to not build more plants and to disinvest really up until about 2000, over my whole professional career, really, up until 2015. And now post 2015, it really showed up in 2017. You have a very strong signal to invest in packing. And sitting here today, thinking back of where we were in 2017, did you know in 2017 that we needed to build more packing? And I'm not asking you gentlemen, I'm asking anybody who's interested in this question. Did you know in 2017 that we should be breaking ground and building packing structure? We'll have the economic incentive for that. We've really had 30 or 40 or almost 50 years of signals to not do that. So it was a real hard, the market we're in there's good economic reasons why this is happening. And I think things will play out that will, we'll take advantage of the incentives right now. And right now it looks to me like we don't have huge disincentives,
Okay, well, I thought I was going to be able to wrap it up, but we're getting a few more questions. And so I think I want to answer these questions. So they're really, really good questions. And I think it's pertinent that we take the time tonight to address some of these. So Dr. Koontz, we know in the pork industry, a lot of the live hogs will be sold on a formula basis based off of, the formula may incorporate the pork cutout. Is that a practice that we see in the beef market?
I don't think we don't see it a lot now. When I've talked to people, they don't talk about, when I've talked to industry participants, they're not talking about necessarily doing that. Certainly not to the extent you see on the pork side. And I think the difference between pork and beef is you have a much more integrated industry with pork. You have packing houses owning some pork production, and you have some pork producers owning for sure portions of packing houses. So it's a little more of a profit sharing type arrangement. Whereas if you move to beef, the investment dollars it takes to build a packing house and feeding facility, and then the land to raise those cattle, it's really cost prohibitive to attempt to integrate. And the packer, you know, when cattle are really high priced compared to the beef, the packer would like to trade in, you know, at that carcass level, and the producer doesn't want to do it. So lots of times the shoe is on the other foot. So I think we'll head more that direction, but in part the differences in ownership create some of those incentives. And so you don't see it very much. You see cattle producers wanting to get paid a cattle price, not necessarily a beef price. A cattle price that certainly has some piece of the beef premiums and discounts associated with it. Really good question.
Okay, good deal. This last one more question, and it was back on that packer margin. I guess the question, would the beef or would the export values, would they be included in that packer margin?
Whatever is going to export, somebody is in the beginning buying that from the packer. So it's going to show up in those cut prices. If they're going to export because somebody overseas is valuing them more, then they're going to pull that price up, and you will for sure see it. Are you going to see the entire valuation? If the packer sells to a distributor who's putting things together to sell to an exporter, you're not going to see it. As Chris pointed out, this is first time sales, so you're not necessarily seeing anything that's just exports, but it is going to show up in that weighted average price.
Okay.
Fair enough, Chris?
And to add to that, the only place that export sales get incorporated into a cutout is on that comprehensive report. The daily cutout on the 402 and the 403, those are just negotiated domestic only. So the only place that the export would be incorporated is on that comprehensive report.
Okay, very good.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Well, the last question, we're going to close it out. And Dr. Koontz, this is going to be directed to you as a economist and a professor at Colorado State University. I know you mentor a lot of young, economists and future economists, I should say. What would you tell them is the best resources to use? And obviously, we know it's AMS data. You already mentioned that, right? But if there's any other data out there, then the other thing is what's the big takeaway? What's the important thing to teach these students?
I think if you develop an interest in following markets, USDA is the gold standard. Just what's available from AMS and is becoming more available. I mean, I didn't know much about My Market News earlier this year, and I know a lot more about it now. So the resources are out there, but they're not going to come to you and teach you how to use them. You've got to make that effort to go dig into those. And then some other advice is, I don't know exactly what you're interested in. You do that. So start that process. AMS, NAS, the variety of folks that are involved with USDA. Speaking of transparency, USDA is incredibly transparent about having data. If they've got data, it's available on the website. So dig around, see what you can find. Occasionally, there's places that have private data that are interesting. I've run across those types of things when you're dealing with international markets, or, for example, if you're interested in what's the soybean price or corn price in South America. That's a different story. That's a much harder task than it is finding all that information of what's going on in the U.S. So if you do much data mining and looking for information to follow markets, the USDA is really a gold standard. I know you set me up for that, but it's not a made up answer. It's the truth.
No.
If you looked at my browser, the top of my browser had AMS and NAS, and I go there all the time. And the other thing that I make use of is, so you got a plug from me for you. I'm going to plug the Livestock Marketing Information Center that puts together a lot of data for me. They're my data provider, and they're very useful for somebody in an extension role who's interested in data from a variety of places, and I can get it all from the LMIC. But I also know where it comes from. I know the original report, so that if there's a little more depth that I need, I can go back to those things. So dig through your data provider, get to know your data sources. There's no substitute for understanding the markets you're interested in.
All right. Well, I sure appreciate that that plug for market news and AMS and USDA. I think tomorrow night when we come back and we join up again, we're going to have 3 panelists, stakeholders out there that use this data very extensively, and I think we'll see that you know, there's so much data out there, and how it's being used from, you know, the small farmer feeder clear up to the corporate cow-calf, even the cow-calf producer out there. So once again, Dr. Koontz and Chris, we appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us this evening. I appreciate all you do, and for being here tonight, taking out of your busy schedule. I would like the participants that are still with us to please go to our survey. You can use the QR code in the upper left corner, fill out the survey. We use that information to formulate future cattle carcass training website or webinars and training. One last reminder, this evening's recording was recorded, and the webinar will be available on USDA's website shown here in coming days, as well as copies of the presentations and all the material. Please come back and join us again for our last webinar in the series tomorrow night. Our series concludes with a panel of industry professionals, as I mentioned earlier. They will share with you how they use the LMR reports in the real world for forecasting, decision-making, and risk management. Have a good evening, and we'll see you back here tomorrow evening.